right, well, it's just about a minute after 7, so maybe we should get rolling. You can go ahead and call the roll.
Maria Ryan,
Here.
Bart Bartles,
Here.
Todd Rusk,
Here.
Andrew Stump,
Here.
Rachel Valenga, Stephen Wald,
Here.
Ryan Wolber.
All right, let's move on to, we do have a quorum present, so let's move on to, are there any changes to the agenda this evening? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to approval of the minutes. Actually, why don't we get a motion on the floor, and then if people have corrections, we can do that, handle that through discussion.
I'll move.
Is there a second?
I can second.
Okay. Any changes or discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, those are approved. And let's move on to our public input. Are there any members of the public who wish to address us this evening? Okay, if you could state your name and address, or yes, your name and address for the record, please.
Carol McCusick, 1907 North Cunningham Avenue. Okay, I was at June meeting, June 3rd, and I decided that with the advisory boards, there's still a lot of decisions you make, but sometimes you might have a decision about whether something is a decision, whether it's a decision or whether it's a decision that SAC can make. So that reminded me that although Robert's Rules of Order advocates or allows a modified process for small boards, and they have definitions enough of small boards, like a board may be assigned a particular function on behalf of a national, state, or local government, and it doesn't function autonomously. It's determined, its responsibilities and powers are delegated to it and conferred on it by an authority outside of itself. So in that, it's like you don't have to necessarily discuss something with a pending motion. But why I think, you know, it is really helpful is because you can proceed stepwise if there's a little complexity to the decision about the Georgetown project I was thinking of. The legal page at the city for the lawyer, the city attorney, that's a new paragraph there, says the boards and commissions should consult or can consult the city attorney on questions, on legal questions. Okay. One of which might be, should every board, is it implicit like that every board should approve like a document that is the schedule of the regular meetings of the year? Now, like, if you don't have that document, you don't get into trouble of being, you could say you don't get into trouble for not saying that a regular meeting that's coming up has been rescheduled 10 days in advance, which it's supposed to be because the way you'd be able to see that is done is if you have this one page or like a Word document that has the regular meeting dates for the whole year with the times and places like worked out in advance of the whole year. So if you don't have that, like some commissions do, some don't. The Civil Service Commission does, the Plan Commission does, the Sustainability Advisory Commission does not, to my knowledge. So like in February, you approved a schedule for the year of 2014, but it wasn't posted with the agenda materials. It wasn't clear what you all were looking at. So, but if that was a paper that had, you know, it's that's sort of set, Then after that, if you want to make changes to it, you can do it as markup, and there's a, of that. And then, once you have that posted online, person could expect that to be up there 10 days before a reschedule was coming along. And there's a lot of good reasons for just beyond having it something that's like ready for a meeting decision. It's kind of meeting decision ready, right? That you could, when you pass it, you know what you passed. Is like it's okay. I'll just give you one. Okay, it's very efficient for showing, for displaying, you know, this date replaces this date, because you just have it crossed out and then replacement beside it.
And it's the 5 minutes are up.
Would you like to give me more time?
Is there a motion to allow more time? No motion on the floor. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to address us this evening? All right. Then let's move to communications and the monthly staff report.
Good evening. Before we get started on the Climate Action Plan, I just want to briefly throw up our yearly schedule. Just as a reminder, we don't necessarily have to stick to this. If we take an extra month, that's fine. But just wanted to show you the general schedule that we're working to stay in tune with. So potentially next month we could agree on a draft climate action plan that would go to the Plan Commission and then also go out for public comment. That would come back to the SAC. They would take into advisement any public comment and then agree on a draft to go to Committee of the Whole. And they could either, Committee of the Whole could either advance that to City Council or send it back to the SAC. So that's the general timeline. I want to do a couple of things.
Well, actually, Scott, did you want to give the staff report first and then move into the...
Sorry.
All right.
Excited.
I was actually quite excited to see how much of the cap 1 is done. That green area on the pie chart keeps getting bigger.
So existing current climate action plan phase, we're still working to engage businesses in the UC Energy Star Challenge. We're still at 52 buildings, expect a few more registrations, and we're kind of transitioning now to work on getting buildings that have registered for the challenge to get their 2013 energy benchmarked and turned in. We're partnering with the Regional Planning Commission right now on a solar market pathways grant through DOE, through Regional Planning Association. And what they're specifically interested in is a program that's known as Solarize. It's group solar purchasing, where a single body, a city, or a nonprofit puts out an RFP or an RFQ, request for quote, on bulk solar purchase installations. So they take that, they offer the vendors sort of hot leads by promoting and collecting names and contact for folks who have stated their interest in installing solar. And by doing this bulk purchasing for all the folks in a particular city in a short period of time, they're able to drive down the price of rooftop solar installations by 20 to 30%. So we are working with the county Regional Planning Commission to put together a proposal. Proposals in, we're just providing additional information to the grant funder. We also have a separate working group staff Todd Rusk, and some community members that have submitted an application for the Georgetown University Energy Prize. This is a competition that would start January next year, run for 2 years, and the metric in the competition is to reduce greenhouse gases from the residential and/or municipal sectors per capita. And we are focusing on some public engagement, specifically getting youth engaged in this process. We're not sure that we're going to be able to overcome the eligibility criteria. At present, we don't get gas and electric gas and electric consumption data for our city monthly. We get it annually from Ameren, Illinois, but we're not sure we're going to be able to get it monthly. We're likely to follow through with the activities that we plan for that competition, even if we're not officially part of it, because I think there are probably going to be some good activities anyway. We're also working to set a date with the Champaign County Economic Development Corporation, who has expressed an interest in hosting the industrial facilities energy efficiency focus group that is described in our current phase of the Climate Action Plan. They're particularly well suited for this. They already work with and provide services to industrial facilities, so they have contacts, so they're a really great group to work with on this. We recently hosted a meeting with the Illinois Science and Energy Innovation Foundation and some community groups to hear about the foundation's grant funding opportunities. They are a special foundation authorized by state statute to do public engagement, public education around smart grid meters, smart grid devices, and smart grid behaviors to coincide with the rollout of the regulated utilities smart grid meters in specific regions of the state. So our region is scheduled second to get smart grid meters, and so the foundation is interested in getting folks here locally to provide grant funds and have them do public engagement with the smart meters. And we have, I think, finalized the greenhouse gas inventory to the greatest degree possible. We have some information that is missing, and so we're using information from prior years. Some information is, based on population model through the tool, but I think it's as complete as we're going to get it in the time frame that we need it. And so we'll discuss that in a minute. You can see Climate Action Plan progress and the Water Management Plan progress. We're also working on a little project with the Extension Service and UPTV. One of our goals in the Water Management Plan was to promote sustainable landscaping practices. So we're working on putting together a series of short commercials or featurettes that will address different topics, both stormwater quality and potable water stormwater quality and potable water quantity. So we're addressing a number of different issues that have to do with landscaping practices. Also happy to announce that UCycle will be testing Clearstream collection containers for recycling and corn cob collection at the Sweet Corn Festival this year. We regularly have a collection bin for corn cobs, and we send those to LRC, Landscape Recycling Center, for composting every year. We've also had a limited number of recycling containers at Sweet Corn Festival. We won a grant to fund Clearstream containers, which are a wire frame that has a plastic lid with identifying symbols and words on it to tell you what goes in there, for instance, recyclables. And then the bottom is a clear plastic bag so that folks can see if it's half full of all cans, and the lid says cans only, that they should probably only put cans in it. So we're going to be testing that to see if we can keep contamination down this year in our recycling containers and increase our diversion rate from Sweet Corn Festival. And the next meeting will be Tuesday, August 5th at 7 p.m.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? All right, I guess we're ready to roll into the inventory and
Great.
CAP Phase 2.
So we talked about the timeline. I want to also review in the graphs in our inventory real quickly. Look at how we compare to other cities. Talk about 2 different tracks that I think we've started to shape up in this plan. Talk about priority actions, and then we can review all the goals in total. So first, what I'm showing you on your screen is essentially the rerun of what we did several years ago, our original baseline inventory. The starting point is not all that different. The ending point is a little different because the new tool, and the trend line is different because the new tool is able to take into account the effect of the renewable portfolio standard. So you see that we're essentially flat, slightly down through 2025 when the renewable portfolio standard ends. Going down, same graph, but with the impact of our renewable energy credit purchases. You'll see in both of these, I don't have control over the colors that the tool outputs. So unfortunately, we have a blue wedge with a blue dotted line over it and a red wedge with a red dotted line over it. But if you look closely, you can see the blue dotted line is our 2020 goal, and the red dotted line is our 2050 goal. The next graph is our re-inventory starting in 2013, and this shows the effect of the renewable portfolio standard projections, and then also the effect of renewable energy credit purchases, such as we're purchasing them now. So at the rate that we're purchasing them now through 2020. So that's presuming that municipal electric aggregation will continue, and that we will continue to buy renewable energy credits through municipal electric aggregation.
Scott,
Yes.
on those graphs, do they is there an output, like a numeric output of that data?
Yeah, it's not on the same display.
Okay. Okay.
I can go back up and show you.
Oh, that's fine. I guess what I was just going to say though is, you could send me that numeric data, and I
Sure.
could make graphs that are easier to read.
Deal.
Anyway.
Sure, and it's up here, a couple pages up. You can see the totals there, missing a comma, but they are there. You also notice that the 2020 and 2050 goals are toggled off here. The tool does not work correctly when you re-inventory. It will apply your 25% reduction based on the 2013 inventory that you're trying to project, rather than continuing to base it on the 2007 inventory. It's something that I think ICLEI can fix in time, but it's not working properly when you re-inventory presently. But for your knowledge, the number that we're shooting for will remain constant at 404,000 metric tons. So you can see that on the graph. Okay. Next, wanted to show you some comparisons. This started from our first phase, where we compared the goals that were the baseline years and the goals that were set by other cities. And so we've taken those same cities, added one city, and then checked up on how they're doing and put their progress here. And you'll see we compare quite well. We're at negative 10%, or we're down 10% greenhouse gas emissions with our recent inventory. Our inventory is a little newer than others, so others may be catching up in the next year. But you can see that we certainly are competing well. And next I wanted to talk about what's shaping up is sort of 2 tracks with this climate action plan.
Can I interrupt
Mhm,
on
sure.
the, so I really like the table that shows the other communities and where they're at. Any communication with those communities and information sharing?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're a participant in a group called the Prairie State Network for Sustainability. And that group has monthly phone calls that have a presentation on some topic of interest to the group, and it's essentially sharing practices.
Okay, great.
We're working on we put together a online spreadsheet for the group to populate just this data. Not too many communities have done that yet. I would like to expand that information sharing into water consumption, which is one of our goals in our water plan, to get data from other communities.
Mhm.
But we're still working on it.
Great, thanks.
It might not be available for all or even any of these communities, but I wonder whether their data for something closer to 2007 levels would be available. I mean, Salt Lake City comes pretty close because they've got 2005 as their benchmark year. But I'm just curious if there's any way to get like just something that's a little bit more apples to apples, because it's kind of, we're sort of cheating because it's 2007 instead of 1990.
Yeah.
So it makes it, but which is not to say that we're not doing well, but it would just be interesting to see if it's possible. But again, I don't know whether those cities even have that data. If you asked
Yeah.
them for what were your numbers in 2010 or what were your numbers in 2005, or
Yeah, they're doing, what I observe is that they aren't updating their numbers every year, sometimes not every 2 years. You see one city there is not doing an update on their inventory. They're seeking funds to do an update. So that could be tough. Todd may be able to speak to how we might be able to manipulate the numbers and get an estimate maybe of 2007, but I don't think it's going to be available in our report. But we could check their websites and see if they just so happen to have done an inventory in 2007.
or somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the plan is starting to shape up into 2 tracks. One of those tracks is a small number of strategies or activities that have a big impact. That is, that when we model them in the tool, you can really see the trend curve downward. And those are the activities that I've listed as priority actions. That's a term that was used in the first climate action plan. And the 3 that I've identified are the continuing purchase of renewable energy credits, a restart of the home energy performance program that we did with stimulus funds several years ago, and then a more general strategy to reduce energy use in the commercial sector or some other sector by the amount listed there. Those 3 strategies can get us down to our 2020 goal. I go on the next page to talk about what those strategies will probably cost. Now, with the home energy performance, we've done it once before. We have a really good idea what it would cost. Renewable energy credits, we're doing that now. We know what that costs. But the strategy to find 25% reduction in commercial electricity use, or potentially, that amount of reduction somewhere else, I don't really have a cost for. If someone was just to buy renewable energy credits for that amount of electricity, it would be about $82,000. So that's again, renewable energy credits are the cheapest way to get greenhouse gas abatement or accounting. So it gives you a sense of the scale we're talking about. The second track that I see this plan developing is mentioned further down on this page, and that's all the other activities that we've listed, which are focused on changing the context that we operate in, so that in the future, when we build or when we do different things, they're done in a more energy efficient manner. Some of the things are good public policy. Some of the things have good co-benefits, but all the other strategies are either have a small impact on our greenhouse gas emissions. That's not that they don't have an impact, it's just a small impact compared to the goals that we set for ourselves. Or to scale them up is extremely expensive. So they have a high dollar cost per metric ton CO2 that they offset. And so on the one hand, to go through a long planning process and only just list 3 goals might seem sparse. On the other hand, we're setting goals that don't have a huge impact. If we do all of the low impact goals but none of the high impact goals, we'll see essentially very little impact on our actual trend line. So I just want to share that there's 2 tracks kind of with 2 purposes. They all help reduce our greenhouse gases, but one helps greenhouse gases in a big way. The other helps greenhouse gases in a small way, but has co-benefits.
Steve? No.
I'm not sure where you are in your presentation. Can we do Q&A
Sure,
as
yeah.
we go? So, I mean, we've set a reduction goal that is based on the emission rate in a target year, not on a cumulative emission rate over, a sustained period of time. So given that, and given the way costs are incurred for at least 2 of these, if not, well, I'm not so sure, but certainly the RECs in the commercial sector, you can basically purchase credited reductions on a yearly basis. Do you have a recommendation for how to, given the way the credits are, the expenditure and the credit given, do we wait until 2020 and purchase then? What would you recommend?
So that we can achieve all of our reductions in 1 year and only have to spend.
It's an artifact of
Yeah.
the goal,
Yeah.
the way we're measuring the goal.
That would be the most cost-effective way to reach our goal. I put the renewable energy credits in the commercial sector there for 2 reasons. One reason is to put a number down, and we don't know what say additional rebates in the commercial sector might cost, but we know it's going to cost more than $82,000 because this is the cheapest way to go, right? The other reason is there is a national effort through the EPA Green Power Partnership to engage and promote businesses that either install power purchase agreement or renewable energy credit their way into green power. Those are all 3 of those are green power to the EPA. And so there's a recognition program. And we could work to leverage that program, promote it here. I will tell you that a lot of the companies, perhaps the majority of the companies, are big companies that have national brands. So whether the Green Power Partnership is going to make a lot of inroads to smaller companies here locally, that's hard to say. But those are the 2 reasons that I bring up the RECs in the commercial.
I realize that, it's kind of half in jest to say, okay, we'll just, buy them in 2020 and get the credit for them. But it does make me, think about, with one of the graphs kind of showing, if we had the residential RECs, there's this little chunk that gets bid out for a certain number of years and then it goes back up. Mm-hmm. Whether the commission should, just think about maybe clarifying the intention of the goals, that that we really do kind of want to have something that's a little bit more that it's more ongoing, that it's more even, that we're not. It doesn't hurt to have those RECs, even if it's a temporary dip. But I just wonder if clarifying the goal a little bit to make our intention clearer, that we really do want to see these savings on an ongoing basis, if there would be value to that.
Yeah, if I can offer a little bit more. So, yeah, my tongue was in my cheek when I made that comment. And because it's true that the impact of greenhouse gases are long-lived in the atmosphere, and the warming in our atmosphere is produced by the cumulative emission, not the annual emission of greenhouse gases, not by the annual emission rate, but by the accumulation of the concentration of the gases. And yet, you know, our program, like all of ICLEI's recommended programs, and like Kyoto was set up and everything else, sets an emission rate that's measured at a given year. So it does set up kind of a compliance incentive that looks like that, especially when you're dealing with mitigation measures or, you know, that of that nature that are just a raw expenditure to move onto the green power. But last week, as we noted, the campus, the University of Illinois, through its building retrofits program, generated emission reductions that they were able to have certified and essentially are monetizing and reselling before that were, you know, emission reductions that were earned before their compliance period, and so they were sort of credits they earned in advance of needing to meet their goal. They were able to monetize those to generate funds that they would use to drive further sort of systemic, you know, hardwired infrastructure-based reductions. So they'll be in great shape when their compliance period comes around, and they did something with their, quote, surplus reductions. I don't know if that's feasible for us or not. I don't know whether, quote, you know, hard reductions like that are akin to the retrofit program they had on campus are feasible given our setting. But I certainly think that's an attractive model, and that going out and just purchasing essentially compliance credits, you know, ought to be sort of a last resort, or potentially a last resort if they're not voluntary, you know, if depending on the source of funds, the kind of thing you do late. Unless those do align as the very cheapest dollar per ton emissions out there for us to have, because in some cases they are.
Yeah, they certainly are the cheapest way. For us to mimic what the university did and sell excess greenhouse gas reductions as renewable energy credits and then plow that money back into some other greenhouse gas reductions, we'd have to first meet and exceed our greenhouse gas reduction goals. I mean, that's what the university did. They were ahead of their goal, correct me if I'm wrong. And so they sold the excess. They sold their excess. They were sort of still meeting their goal and then plowed it back in to some investments.
Well, I don't know, Bart, do you know, I thought they had a goal like we did, an out-year goal that's a point estimate. And so they have reductions below their baseline. So until their compliance year, when their score counts or whatever, they're just selling the excess. So it's not that they reduced below.
They're also selling from production, from solar PV, presumably.
Not a lot yet. They're
No.
planning on it, but I don't think there's a lot there. The numbers mentioned, I think, are just based on reduction, just the conservation efforts and the upgrades and the retrofits. So it's just, energy reduction from the baseline in selling those as credits.
So it's not a renewable energy credit then, it's a energy efficiency credit,
It's
that what you're saying? Or carbon credit or something like that, but it's not from the production. Or did they sell the future reductions?
Yeah, reduction rather than production, yeah.
Okay.
No, and they're certified by a third party. I think some of this is prospective, but the intent in the agreement is that they'd be certified by a third party, and they are vintage. They have a year vintage, so some of them have happened. There are reductions that happen in emission year, 2011, 2012. They're being retroactively quantified, certified, and then sold. And then they can be used by a third-party purchaser to meet an emissions target.
Right.
I have a comment, a little bit different subject, but back to the the section on the priority actions, and I like the idea of kind of talking about a couple of different tracks. So I don't mean this to I don't mean this to be kind of nitpicky or wordsmithy, but I guess I would like to think that every action that we have in here and everything that we recommend is a priority. And so one thing that I'm concerned about how this could be perceived is that we've got these three big ones, and those are great. I think it's important to say Here are some things that we are putting a priority on for their value as quantitative, realizable things that we can actually imagine those things. And then the other ones, some of the other strategies, I think they're their category of things that we don't yet know how to quantify what the impact will be, and there's just just in this whole field, there's so many communities just like us in universities where we're getting to the nitty gritty. Like, how do you do that? And we don't know, and we're trying to figure that stuff out. And so, like with the with some of the working groups, we can't really claim real quantitative things, but they're important processes that I think will be that can lead to robust, sustained improvements in the future. And so, anyway, I just, and I'm happy to work with you on that, or just, offer some written comments on that.
Sure.
But, anyways.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to downplay the other strategies. Some of them I'm really interested in, but I want to be upfront that the other ones just don't have the same impact as these other three.
Right, and maybe it's just a way of how it's framed.
Sure.
That it's just kind of maybe that it's framed more as strategies that look to the future, or that are intended to open up other possibilities in the future, and then clarify that we're just that they're not going to give us immediate dramatic returns, but they're important because
they're forward-looking, they're innovative, they're public process, it's education, it's transformation, it's hard work, right?
Mm-hmm. That's what I've learned in this process, and seeing all these other cities who are, struggling greatly to find strategies that have a big impact and to meet the goals that they've set. I've printed out just a couple of pages and put it in front of you to highlight some edits that have been made since the most recent version was emailed to you. I talked about the changes on page 20 with the comparisons, and I've talked about some of the changes on page 22 with what's now called priority actions. On page 25, goal 4 is different insofar as it has aggregated a couple of different activities under one title. They were separate in an earlier version. I wanted to point that out.
Scott, would it be possible to, as you continue to work on this, to put it in just a place that would be accessible to the commission, just so we can, kind of see your most recent draft?
Sure.
Whenever we're...
if you want, I can, email it out more frequently when there's, edits made. I'm using InDesign. I don't know if I've ever tried it, but I don't know that it outputs to Word. And if you don't have InDesign, you can't open it.
Right.
But
outputs to PDF though. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is it's going to be a, I made some changes, export PDF, and then email it out to you, which I can do, say, on a weekly basis or something like that if you desire.
Yeah, because I'm thinking that, if we want to, if we're kind of targeting next month for a possible vote, I think it would be good for us to be able to kind of, be able to give you feedback.
Sure.
In the interim.
Can do. One other change, we met with Community Development Department last week, and they advised that we edit the section addressing reductions in gasoline or transportation sector, however we want to title that. We had talked about using lead ND as a new parcel unit development type. CD would prefer that we instead take elements or look into elements of LEED ND and incorporate it into the existing zoning, subdivision development, and existing PUD types. So use LEED ND to improve those existing pathways rather than create a new pathway. So there's some new language in here on that. And we'd also discussed walk score, and we didn't come up with a way to leverage walk score. We all love walk score, but we're not sure how we can leverage it into an action that is going to be realistic for us.
Can you expand just a little bit on why?
So a big part of walk score is how many different types of uses are within walking distance, some distance of whatever location you choose, or looking at the whole city level as walk score can. And I don't know how we have a fairly good walk score as it is. I imagine that to improve our walk score, we would have to mix additional diverse uses into some of the large single-use neighborhoods that are already existing, and I don't think that there's an interest in that from those residents. I'm speculating somewhat. I'm not sure that there is property available to do that, and I'm not sure that there's interest on behalf of those residents to do that.
I just have a question about the preference of going with the community development criteria over the LEED ND criteria. Because I think to the general public, there may be the perception, maybe not the reality, but the perception, LEED ND might add some value to that neighborhood because there's a standard there that the general public understands, or at least a lot of the general public understands, whereas the community development, to be honest, I'm not sure what that would entail. So what are your thoughts on one versus the other?
So when I say community development, I'm talking about the department known as community development, under which is the planning division. And I think in terms of the actual real environmental work that those individual LEED ND practices do, whether they're in a development following LEED ND or whether they're incorporated into our planning and zoning development codes, they're going to do the same amount of work. I appreciate that you're saying LEED ND has some brand recognition that might have some value. What community development department was interested in was focusing on improving their existing codes rather than adding a new PUD type.
I am just, kind of brainstorming here, but I wonder if having some of that built into the codes, so to speak, maybe it becomes a platform for saying to developers, well, you have to do this bit of LEED ND anyway. Maybe you should consider going for
Yeah.
the whole rating system, and then, kind of with the idea that Bart presents, that it can, maybe make a neighborhood more attractive for consumers.
And if you don't know, the City of Champaign, one of their big redevelopment projects right now is pursuing LEED ND. Bristol Place, is that right? Is that the name of it? I think that's the name.
While we're on the subject of LEED, I did note on under Goal 1 that there was kind of the idea of requiring LEED or energy star these various certifications, and I'm wondering if in Goal 1 maybe it would be a good idea to use the kind of language that's used on page 23, where it's designed to achieve the certification, simply because you can't really guarantee. It's the certifying body that's ultimately going to make the decision, and so you can't really.
Yeah, there
But
are a
you-
number of cities that have done this, and what they do is they'll either at the end of the process. So there's some milestones with LEED, and you match those up with milestones in your ordinance, and then at the end of the process, they'll have either an incentive or a penalty if you don't end up getting the certification.
Okay.
I've looked at them; they seem reasonable. I can't remember
Right.
exactly how they're set up, but we'll follow what we'll call other cities and see how it's worked out, and follow one of those.
Great.
Hey, backtracking just a little bit, and it's always dangerous to freeform some conversation here, but I'm thinking again about the expenditure of real resources on RECs in advance of our compliance period need to. And I wonder, just as a thought experiment, it wouldn't be preferable to take a similar amount of resources and try to pursue quote-unquote hard reductions in our actual build infrastructure in advance of the compliance period with a similar amount of resources. So like thought experiment, spend $82,000 a year now on RECs through 2020 every year versus a similar investment that really tried to chip away at quote permanent savings in the quality of our infrastructure in terms of energy efficiency or construction of renewable power for that matter.
Sure.
And then banking the compliance purchase if we had to, if we didn't meet our goal.
That strategy has a couple challenges. This was debated at City Council with the agreement of the last municipal electric aggregation program. One problem is that once it's in our contract, the city never gets that money. It doesn't pass through us, the money that's spent on renewable energy credits. It's per contract, and it's assessed per kilowatt hour used. Second thing that was discussed at council was, we could set it up so that that money that we would otherwise, that ratepayers would otherwise spend on renewable energy credits could be instead part of a city fee, and then we could use that money to do some other, infrastructure improvements or mechanical improvements, that sort of thing. And it was decided to go with the renewable energy credits because they get so much more work done per dollar. And in terms of selling some reductions, it would, at that point when we agreed the municipal electric aggregation program, that would probably be the best point to say, well, we just won't buy these credits rather than find some other credit somewhere else to sell, and sort of taking out of one hand to give it to another.
Yeah, I know when I was reading through the pieces in this draft about the renewable energy credits, the question did come to mind, kind of where is the council on this question at this point? Because there had been some of those questions raised. And, I know we've, done a good bit of reading on RECs, but the draft as it stands, and I don't know how much more you have planned for it. It didn't have a lot of, kind of hard-hitting I guess it was assuming RECs are good for the most part. And I was just wondering if, it sounds like maybe it's not as much of an issue for the council at this point, but I don't know. I know we didn't have lots of people, there weren't many members of the public who brought forward objections to RECs, but we did have at least one or two fairly vocal critics. And I wonder if it would be, prudent to have a little bit more in the next draft that might address some of those issues head on. Simply because, we did hear about it during the course of the first draft.
We did some investigation on this, and we had discussion on that, and maybe there was a literature review. So I think we all agreed that it's it's a legitimate practice, and I guess so maybe we don't have to go through all of that again. But I think to your point, that body of information and that discussion could be an appendix or, something that supports the legitimacy of the decision.
Yeah, I think that would probably work real well.
Okay.
So I've got
Yeah.
one page that summarizes renewable energy credits here in the background, and then I'm going to insert our annotated bibliography as an appendix.
Okay, yeah, and actually I did kind of scroll through the appendixes because I thought, oh, maybe it's in the appendix.
I'm not sure I put
And I
it in
wasn't
there
sure how
yet.
far along
And
you were with the
that's a
draft,
really
so I
good
didn't want to
graphic.
get too,
I like that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
yeah.
But thank you for the reminder. I do intend to put that in the appendix. I think those are the most significant changes from what we've discussed and looked at from last month.
Yeah, and I did have just one other brief comment on Rex, which was, I'm wondering if it wouldn't, again, just kind of be prudent in terms of anticipating public comment that, where we talk about the cost of Rex for residential, I mean, it kind of says zero because of zero cost to the city, but it'd probably be prudent to just note, that it would be how much it would cost the
Sure.
residents and maybe frame that in terms of, that it's a very small percentage of what they're paying for their energy bill, but nonetheless promises to have pretty good impact.
So this is a different line of thought, but so we had a phase one, and now we're doing a phase two, and the idea that this is a longer term approach. I wonder if we should in this document talk about 2 or 3 years down the road. I mean, obviously this isn't the last thing, and we're going to have to reinvestigate and evaluate progress and things like that. So I wonder if we want in this document to make another plan for, say, 2 years down the road or 3 years or whatever an appropriate time is. We don't have to call it phase 3, but the
Right.
reevaluation and reassessment, I think, of progress and the revised plan.
In the first phase, there was a statement to reinventory every 2 years. I think that's doable. And then in terms of sort of a phase 3, I was thinking, we've got some strategies laid out here that show us how to get to 2020 in terms of meeting our goals. Our first goal, time frame is 2020. And so maybe that's an appropriate time to plan a phase 3 or talk about, okay, how do we go from 2020 to 2050? It's possible that we may need, or it may be desired, to have a more thorough check-in before that, more thorough than just the re-inventory. Is that something we could discuss if there's a time in between now and 2019?
I might just share just a random thought going through my head, I guess, and that's RECs, like everything else, are market-based and, of course, would be open to risk in the future of a big price jump as we're about ready to buy RECs in the future. So I guess going back to Stephen's point about almost like buying futures contracts and locking in a price and reducing our risk long term. It's not all that abstract of random of an idea, locking in energy prices now, just in case there's a spike later. It's might be something to really consider.
Yeah, one of our goals is it's essentially to continue doing something we've already done, which is evaluate a long-term purchase of power and RECs bundled together in a power purchase agreement rather than unbundled, which is what we do now. We buy our power on the power market for the cheapest power we can get, and we buy our RECs on the RECs market for the cheapest RECs we can get. But to continue to look for a possibility of buying those bundled together, it sends a slightly different market signal. And the easiest way to do that is with city facilities. It's a lot smaller purchase. We control it. And so we're going to continue to look at that. And the university's looking at that right now as well. And that, more to your point, those are typically long-term agreements, 10 and 20 years. The prices we got a year ago, they usually fix a schedule of price escalation, but you know what you're getting. It's a hedge against potential price increases in the future.
I have a couple of questions on the material kind of toward the end of the draft, the sort of pages 23 to 27. One is just a general question of whether we have, and I know the ICLEI software that we used for the phase 1 document, it kind of had metrics for every last little strategy you could possibly think of, and I don't know whether that kind of data is available for maybe getting a little bit of a feel for what metrics, what percentages would be attached to some of these other goals?
So the new tool has a very small number of, shall we say, pre-programmed emission reductions measures that you can just kind of plug a number into. It then has user-defined for each sector that you might address. So, residential electric, residential gas, that sort of thing. So we've toyed around with the ones that are pre-programmed, and we've attempted to model some user-defined measures as well in the tool. So, for instance, one that I know off the top of my head because I looked at it today was commercial buildings benchmarking, which is what we're doing with the Energy Star Challenge, and what U.S. EPA does with 250,000 buildings across the country. Looking at a reasonable, plugging in a reasonable amount of square footage that we might get into a benchmarking program, and then just letting their pre-populated estimates of how much these programs save per square foot of participation. We come up with 100 metric tons of CO2 reduced a year. That's a really small amount compared to the 50,000 that we need. It's not nothing, but it's a small amount.
Okay. Yeah, and I wonder. Well, I suppose it goes back to some of that framing of the second track that we were discussing earlier.
Yeah.
As to whether it would be worth it to attach metrics to this or not. But I was wondering if if we wanted to go that route, if it was even available.
It is, and if anyone's interested, I'm happy to sit with you and show you the backside. And if there's one you're thinking of that I haven't tried out, we can try and put in some numbers and see what it looks like. I made a rough model of electric vehicles. The first thing you have to do is go see what kind of emissions reduction you get from going from gas to electric vehicle. And the first thing you come across, I forget, I think it was a DOE site or something like that, where you can plug in your particular grid. Well, in our grid, you're mostly, exchanging gasoline for coal. So the emissions reduction per vehicle is 18%. So in the transportation sector, it's not set up to where I could put in, well, what if we get 100 new electric vehicles? Then what do we get? It's not set up that way. It's kind of all or none. And, if you put in all at 18%, you can see an improvement. But we're not going to get all in, all 100% of cars, electric or even some great proportion by 2020. So, again, that measure doesn't have a real powerful impact.
You may have covered this in a previous meeting, but I don't recall. Did you give any credit to the city as far as any kind of carbon sink for the trees in the city?
No, there's not a setup for that type of measure, and we would have to, presumably we could do a user-defined, and we could just either spread it out evenly across all the sectors, or just lump it in with one and kind of distort that sector, because it wouldn't, say we lump it in with residential. It's not really what we mean by residential emissions. But there would only be something to account for if we had a change from 2007. And
that's true. Yeah. Okay.
we plant a lot of trees, no doubt. I'm not sure that the change is that big.
Right. But that's an annual sink, which, So, anyway, if there's a way to account for it, might be a great class project.
Yeah, we can.
and the
I'll
but
relook at it and talk to the arborists.
And there may be something in iTree, because I know the iTree does account for various environmental benefits, and I don't know if it, specifically would address this in a way that's translatable, but
Yeah.
it's probably worth looking
I
into.
mean, to be fair, we'd also have to account for all the trees that we cut down for safety reasons or disease abatement reasons.
Well, maybe that's, kind of the thing of, having some kind of, tree maintenance plan that does take those factors into account. And, also, kind of like the replacement cycles and the pruning cycles for safety that, that might save a tree's life because a branch didn't fall on somebody and kill them. So.
Yeah, I'll look at that again. That's a good question.
I was also wondering, in the adaptation section, we've just got a couple of things there. I don't know if you have other things in mind to add to that.
So we had that series of speakers, and there are a lot of activities that are typically talked about in climate adaptation. But I observed that when we ask about those activities to the different agencies, a lot of the response we got was, well, we already do that. If climate makes it worse, we'll do it more. And there was also some pushback that, well, this climate change that you're talking about is, it's going to be over the course of 20 years, 50 years. We can react in that time frame. And then if you ask, well, if you had to ask the city for something in order to adapt to this increase, what would you ask for? Money. So it didn't necessarily, so public health is a good example, didn't necessarily come up with a strategy that that was anything other than plan to give, a different government agency more money. They have their own revenue sources, and so they'll presumably take care of that when needed. The two that I've identified, are ones that I don't immediately see, an action that's going to be inevitable. The first one is the design storm standards. So what is a 50-year storm? What is a 100-year storm? And do those need to be changed based on different presumptions, those design standards? We don't control that. So the goal is really to engage the water survey, who does, and talk to them. Does this need to be changed? Should it change? Should we change it? What do we need to do to change it? So put in a call today, actually, to find the right person to talk to about that. And so we'll continue to engage with them on that. The other strategy is addressing our arbor division and making sure that our tree canopy is resilient, because that does a lot of things for us in terms of adaptation. It helps us stay cool in a warming climate. It helps relieve demand on mechanical systems in a warming climate. So I think there's a lot to be done there for us that we actually control.
Yeah, actually, it might, again, this being a public document, maybe to draw out some of those points, because one of the things that did come to my mind was things like you're saying. I know we had talked a little bit about, are there, ways to do landscaping, tree planting, water features that would serve as offsets, to be kind of like, for lack of a better term, kind of natural cooling centers. And then I also wonder about adding, maybe just adding something that's, specifically about, and I don't think that it was addressed by public health, but, and I don't know which agency it would fall to provide cooling centers in the more traditional sense of an air-conditioned large public building where people can go that don't have air conditioning at home.
I think the public health
Okay.
said that they do that.
All
I
right.
don't
All right.
know if anyone else remembers, but
There are a couple of things on this page 26. Just a typo in the storm design standards. The first bullet should end once in a period of 50 years, and this reads 150 years. And then a possible suggestion for action 2 is that I'm remembering John Marlin mentioning this in one of his last meetings, the role of species selection of the trees to take into account in some way the habitat value to birds, wildlife, pollinators, those kinds of things. I don't know that native selection of native trees is currently on the priority list of the Arbor Division, although that may be changing, and I think the Tree Commission is placing an increased emphasis on native tree species. So just a species selection that takes into account native trees, possible shifts, anticipated shifts in the climate regime, and role and the need to sustain insects, birds, and wildlife.
yeah, what I was considering in that goal, and it may not be explicit here, is as climate zones shift northward, do we have more northerly trees that are going to die out faster? And do we have some desirable southerly trees that would like our climate better? And maybe we should be planning for that sort of species shift.
On page 19, could you just walk me through the graphic a little bit? It wasn't, it may just be me being obtuse, but it was a little, I wasn't quite sure how to read the graphic.
Okay. So I was trying to recreate a graphic that was in the first phase, and I don't have any Excel document or anything like that had produced it. So I was trying to recreate it in Excel, color it, and then add some numbers to it. So the red bar is our total emissions in 2007. The 2020 bar is how much more emissions it would have, which is, again, because the RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, is in effect till then. It's just slightly more emissions. And then the light colored blue is the 25% reduction at year 2020. And then the 404,891 is the actual numerical level of 25% reduction.
Thank you.
It was more explicit on the first climate action plan because it was 2020 was easily you could tell it was bigger, but here it's quite close.
For the comment period, I know it's going to go to the Plan Commission and obviously Committee of the Whole. I think the last time around, I think BPAC took a look at it. I don't think it went to Tree Commission. I would just wanted to put out the question about, are there other commissions that might have some, both that the commissions themselves might have some input for us, or that, the members of the public who are drawn to their meetings would become more aware of this plan being developed if it went to a couple other commissions. Not to slow the process down, but
Yeah, I can look at their schedules. I don't think BPAC meets as regularly as, say, we do. So that may or may not have a meeting in that time. Maybe they want to decide to have a meeting just for this, but can pursue that. And Tree Commission might make sense since we're talking about their sphere specifically.
Okay, so last meeting, we were talking about the climate action plan, and one comment that I had was that just a thought that it might help in the context of the report to give some additional way to understand what 80% reduction means, what 20% reduction, or what 25% reduction means, and to put the goals in perspective. And so we have a decent level of data about the residential sector, and there's a small working group of us actually looking at what kinds of things can we do in the residential sector. So I just took a shot at doing some analysis of the residential sector, and so it's kind of it's an attempt at providing something that can put some perspective in the report, but also maybe a little bit of a thought experiment, and also to give us a sense of what kinds of things are possible in the residential sector, and to give us, to kind of, we talk about these different sectors, like there's a residential sector, electric and natural gas, and they're kind of like these black boxes. And so I want to break open those black boxes. And so what I did was looking at a combination of monthly electricity data that we have from Homefield Energy, and then looking at the same time some of our annual data on some of the annual use of natural gas and electricity in the residential sector. And then also combining that with information from the U.S. DOE, Department of Energy, Energy Information Administration, and other federal sources. There's some guidance on breakdown of energy use in the typical home. So on a national level and also down at an Illinois level. So there's a lot of data here, and there are some levels of abstraction, but the idea is to take the data that we have and the intelligence that's out there that applies to Urbana, that applies to Illinois, and just more broadly, and break down what is a typical residence. And so I think this is maybe a first tiny little step at Mario, you asked a question about the software, the ICLEI software. I had these laundry list of measures, and so having some breakdown of the energy use in the home, I think, can give us a little bit of guidance on what that is. And so the point of this chart is just to show in terms of, it was actually kind of tricky to figure out how to present the data, because we can talk about it in terms of, say, kilowatt hours and therms, or we could talk about it in terms of BTUs or MMBTUs, or we could talk about it in tons of, metric tons equivalent of CO2. And I settled on cost because it just seems like that is something that people, for the most part, understand, their cost of energy. So this, anyways, and I put that out there because the way to present the information is something that I'm still a little bit struggling with, and what is the best way. So here on this particular chart, this is a theoretical average Urbana residence. And so what is based on is our consumption data and the number of residential utility accounts in Urbana. And so that was the best thing that I could come up, I would love something more statistically rigorous, like a median, or but anyway, so I'm open to some suggestions or other ideas here. But what we see here is each category of use has our 2007 baseline, and then the entries for 2020 and 2050 are based on an assumption that the entire residential sector uniformly realizes their proportional reduction. So this is not saying the residential sector by itself is carrying the entire load of all. It's saying the residential sector is carrying its share of the burden. And what does that look like when we apply those uniformly across the different energy use types? So obviously, in our climate, heating is the number one thing, and so that goes for. And it turns out that the cost of energy and the contribution to climate emissions are, with the balance of electricity and natural gas, they track pretty well with each other. And so each of these items are ranked in order of cost of energy, and it also turns out that they are also ranked in terms of their climate impact. And so, I think the big thing to look at here then is the difference between the black bars and those light gray bars. So that is what it means for the residential sector to be carrying its weight in meeting the goals for 2050. So the average, the theoretical average Urbana residence will be using, instead of, say, over $500 a year in heating, about $100 a year. And I'm not taking into account I'm not taking into account RECs or the portfolio standards, just, simple, one step at a time. And then it's applied uniformly to all of these different categories. So that's this graph was the punchline. So maybe I'll just stop for a second. I'm seeing a range of quizzical looks, and so just to open it up for a minute, and then there are some other, there's some other things that we could look at, but maybe stop for a moment.
Yes, Larry. I just have a question about, does this assume constant energy prices until 2050?
It's assuming constant everything.
Constant everything. Okay.
Yeah.
Todd, does this take into account that some of our reductions could be not in efficiency but in increase in renewables, whereby a person's energy bill might stay the same, their consumption of electricity might stay the same, but the greenhouse gases could go down because the proportion of their consumption that's renewable goes up?
That would fit as well. Yeah. And I will also just say that there's a lot of things that this does not take into account, and the idea is to put kind of a form or a presentation out there in front of you all, And I think anything that would go into the report would have to take a lot more things into account and be a more careful thing. But I guess I'd like to get the basics right first and get some thoughts on just the presentation and, you know, with the idea of the information.
It might be interesting to have like a couple of different graphs for comparison, so that maybe the scenario that Scott puts forward, you know, there would be a graph there that would show maybe that you're not going to save as much money, but, you know, that it could show how much greenhouse gas emission reduction there would be. But then, you know, to sort of have something, you know, pretty much like what you have here, and just say, if you just reduce your usage, bam, you know, look, you also kind of reduce your bills. But I guess I'm thinking, you know, there might be a couple of different graphs with different scenarios, and then, you know, maybe with a little verbiage to point out the advantages to the individual of each of those.
What kinds of, so you're talking about the scenarios of, say, renewable energy and energy efficiency, or anything more?
Yeah, so for instance, you know, here's what the graph looks like if you switch over to renewables. And don't change your usage. And so maybe that would, you know, that might show the price, you know, like the money you spend out of pocket being the same, or, you know, possibly even a little higher. But then the advantage to you is more of just a moral advantage. Okay, you know, you didn't have to change anything that you did, but you're still, you know, contributing less to the climate change. And then maybe compared to, you know, there could be a couple of other different scenarios. And then there could be, at least what I'm understanding from what you've got presented here, where, you know, this really would, like the lever that gets pushed the hardest on this, if I'm understanding it correctly, is efficiency, reduced usage. And so, you know, there, you know, it's maybe the person has to change the way they do things, or maybe they have to put a sweater on in the winter in their house, or maybe they have to put up with being a little bit warmer in their house in the summertime, but they would see, you know, some reduction in their bills, as well as knowing that they're contributing less to the demise of the planet.
Right. You know, I actually didn't intend to express a preference for efficiency or renewable energy. I guess I saw them as the same thing, but I can see how they can be viewed as different scenarios. But the net effect is, I guess it's the net, right? Okay.
I would just, overall, as you intimated, the complexity of kilowatt hours and therms, or maybe it's GHGs, or, you know, whatever. I sympathize with the struggle for the right metric, but I would caution against using dollars as the metric. I think there's just too many floating factors, and it's too much potential to confuse or mislead. Because even if it was sheer energy efficiency, there would be investments entailed at the household level that wouldn't be reflected by, a mere reduction in your energy bill. It's not the same thing. As you know, there's a investment and a payback period and an equivalent cost of energy, and lots of complexity going forward. And I'm not sure it's informative to model reductions as uniform across uses either. It may be. I mean, it may be illustrative, but I'm thinking of an exercise I did way back at our information poster session that we did at the Civic Center prior to the release of our first phase. And I didn't model an average residential account, but I modeled a specific one, and I was using the Acton Energy, or Ameren's, Ameren at the time, I don't think they have it anymore, had a household energy planning tool that let you model and consider various improvements to your house in terms of adding insulation, changing your water heater, getting a new high efficiency combined, heater cooling system. And it spit out some pre-modeled cost estimates and benefit estimates, both in terms of energy performance and greenhouse gases. Anyway, I queried that data set and actually was able to show sort of the cost reduction curve in terms of benefits, and it was highly differential across these uses in terms of where the most energy efficient. At the time, I can pull up this poster, but it did show you could get to 25% at without much net expenditure on a household basis by 2020. Deeper cuts came at a positive cost to the homeowner, but that was, I thought, informative in that it showed a clear signal that, hey, you know, the compact fluorescents are worth it, the insulation's really worth it. I think that I'm trying to remember I shouldn't go further than that because I don't remember off the top of my head what the items that came at a net savings were, but there were several, and they could get you to 25% on a household basis. I think something like that is a way of modeling a similar thing, possibly steering the consumer to and showing some numbers, you know, which I think there are data sets out there we could pull that you've started doing with the CIA stuff, and I'm not sure what the tabs at the bottom show across house systems and different improvement options. But it may be something more towards that. And anyway, just to back out, you know, when I look at the attributing it in terms of dollars, it's nice as a common metric in terms of your energy bill. But I think there's, as Bart led off by saying, hey, it's assuming a standard cost of energy, and it's not looking at the cost incurred to achieve those savings, and so it's not.
Right. So what are some other, you know, what are some other ways of, you know, if we could talk about units of energy, but that doesn't necessarily speak to a lot of people. And so I guess I hear that, and I guess I'm not necessarily pleased with reporting it as dollars because it doesn't translate over time. You know, we're looking at a snapshot in time right now and pretending that 13 years, 40 years from now, we're going to make those same assumptions. But, you know, we're very short-sighted species. And so I guess I'm struggling with that. But one thing that, you know, from your comments, and just, you know, we were talking about maybe what is instructive and illustrative in this case would be, say, just, you know, modeling a scenario that gets us to 2020, because I think that's where we're at right now. We're trying to get to 2020. So maybe an alternative presentation would be, you know, I'd be happy to look at what you have. I brought together a lot of, you know, real data from Urbana, and if you're interested, I can. So anyways, you can see I'm using cost factors, just, you know, real crude things, just to get the pencil to the paper, you know, and get some numbers going. And you know, over in this section here is just about, you know, what's on a household basis, on the average household basis, emissions per household, and, you know, per energy use type. And I don't know how much, you know, you can stop me if there's something you want to see. But, you know, so down here I've combined information from the EIA, and then also I took a little bit of inspiration from, just because I didn't have a better idea, from Energy Star, and they had this graphic of, you know, where does my money go? And so that, you know, that's kind of grab that idea and say, okay, well, what if we, you know, do this uniform reduction and map it out over the years? And so that's kind of where that came from. This is the source of electricity data, and so this is actual, you know, monthly electric data, and so there's actually a little bit of real information to support, you know, this is how much, you know, we can actually say, you know, there's a certain amount of electrical energy that is associated with heating in the cool season. Maybe I'll slow down a little bit and say, let's just actually, let me scroll down a little bit. So this is just the entire residential sector, and those are distracting. Sorry, nerd with numbers. So just residential sector completely. Actually, these are the opt-in accounts through the home field. And so that's what, maybe 95% opt-in. And so this is, so there's a lot of different ways to represent energy consumption. And so this one is, every dot is 1 month of electricity consumption. And so along the x-axis, there was a monthly mean temperature. And there was an associated electricity consumption associated with that. And so in analyzing buildings, analyzing communities, it really helps to do this. This is one way of weather normalizing. And so what this graph does is it characterizes the weather, the energy consumption characteristic curve of the community independent of the weather, because the weather is it's just one of the parameters. And so we can use this to deduce, how much is for cooling, how much is for heating, and then how much is then wrapped up in lights and all kinds of other things. And by the way, this is the type of graph that, so when I'm asking Scott every other month, when are we going to get the monthly data? This is why I want to have the monthly data. Because it's a much more robust in terms of statistical analysis. And let's say we have a 5% reduction. If I have one data point for a year, that's not necessarily a statistically significant indication. But then if I have 12 data points, or if I have maybe that 5% was wrapped up in savings that happen in the winter, insulation programs, then what we will see is we'll see just the change reflect in this region over here. So anyways, lots of tricks you can do with this kind of data presentation. So anyways, that's not the focus of the presentation, but
also the monthly data, you're showing electricity because this is the home field stuff, and they don't sell natural gas.
They don't sell natural gas. Yep.
Todd, from my perspective, I don't think I'd be that concerned about using units as far as the metric, as far as your reporting, whether it be MMBTUs or perhaps even metric tons of CO2, because I think you could relate that to, like you said, the median household. And the individual might not know how many therms or MMBTUs they consume, but if you use the median household number and then the changes that would occur to that median household, I think the average homeowner might be able to identify with that.
One way to test that out is to go with that theory and just wrap the presentation around that and put it through the review process. It's going to go out. It's going to go out for public comment. It's going to run its rounds through staff, through council, and so maybe one thought is maybe there's a couple of different options for presentation, and we can put it in front of people and see what kind of presentation clicks, or I think the comments will reveal a lot, and I kind of expect some, because there's always anyways, these things never speak for themselves as well as we could hope.
Right. I mean, I may be a pessimist at heart, but usually when I see the volume, I'm already thinking in the back of my head, well, energy prices are going to go up, so take that into account, kind of thing. So for me, I like looking at the units.
Okay.
Maybe using percentage of the cost might be better. of the total cost. So then if the cost goes up, the percentage may stay the same, but,
For that matter, percentage of use.
or, yeah.
It's just a proportion. Any thoughts on just, I mean, does this, I mean, so it's not perfect and it needs some work, but thoughts on whether this type of information gives us perspective that adds to the presentation of, this is, here, we have a goal and there's a percent number and there's all kinds of numbers. But I guess, you can offer comments now or just think about it. But I guess if it adds value to the report and adds perspective, and I feel like there's something, maybe I didn't quite hit it here, but I think we need something to give to perspective to what those goals really mean and what it means for, in the household, I think speaks to just about everybody.
I think visually you're right on.
What's that?
Visually, I think it comes across perfect when you're looking at just the first heating section. Wow, that's got to be a big reduction. So we need some, significant work on that.
What I like is that it speaks to behaviors. That you can take a look at this and you can see that I can unplug my cell phone every time the battery gets charged, until the cows come home, and it's really not going to have much impact. But if I am willing to put on a sweater and turn the heat down a little bit, that's going to have a bigger impact. So I think it's good, and maybe some verbiage could be part of this, just in terms of framing it as, when you're deciding where do you want to put your focus on your behaviors. I think this kind of helps guide people, to know where they're going to have the most impact.
And I'll send you the presentation I did. When I think about this stuff, I always think about the just sort of the quantity and cost reduction curves. So like, how much, if it's insulation, how much reduction is available at what price? And it's one of those things that, and you can sort them in order. And so then as a homeowner, and you're thinking about, okay, if my goal is to reduce my energy bill, or maybe I do have a carbon reduction goal that I'd like to pursue, it just gives you that priority list. It shows you volumes and prices of different strategies. And yeah, some of them are either going to be really hard to do for a small amount, or maybe you can do a lot, but it's really expensive. And so you just have a sense of where you are and what measures to pursue. And I think there are some data sets we could pull to construct, at least to provide some guidance or some guidelines for folks.
Well, that sounds good, because it. I guess I like the idea of, in the climate action plan, we are trying to offer constructive strategies, and so that can be an accompaniment to this. Our, not just here's a challenge, but here's some guidance on it.
When you built these graphs, are these bar charts? They're not just 100%, 80%, and 20% for each one. They're based on a greenhouse gas emission attributable to that technology, and it's the 80 and the 20.
It's based on those bars are based on the associated greenhouse gas emission reductions, not on the energy cost reductions.
Yeah.
It just turns out that for whatever reason, happenstance, the proportions are remarkably similar.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else, either on the graphs or on the climate action plan draft? Well, kudos to Todd, to Scott, this is really coming along very well, and it's been, it's just really nice to kind of see a lot of the discussions and a lot of the things that we've been thinking about and hearing about over the months, really start to come together into something coherent, and I'm excited. All right. Let's turn to new business and the long-range transportation plan. And Scott, I don't know if you had any introductory comments. This was just more something to, I think, that following up on the meeting last week, if folks had any points that they wanted to bring up with regard to the LRTP.
I thought the joint meeting was really constructive. I benefited from the discussion from members of other commissions. Just mentioning this because they talked about coming back to the commissions, and just the way it came across was we'll come back to each commission separately. And I certainly would be open to someone taking a counterpoint to this, but we should have them another joint session when they come back, just for efficiency and for discussion.
Andrew?
I thought it was a really complicated discussion. There's lots of moving parts and different interest groups, and I thought it was really constructive to see just the range of things they had to address in their plan. So,
Yeah, I think it was quite impressive. I was surprised to see how complex the modeling was that they discussed. And I think it'll really be interesting to see how the models overlap with the health. And now they're looking at kind of ranking the neighborhoods with health and transportation and the benefits and what neighborhoods are, how each neighborhood is doing. So I'm looking forward to seeing that.
All right, any other comments? Okay, great. Do we have any announcements this evening? Okay, I think that's unprecedented that we have no announcements, but no need to make any up if we don't have any. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Is there a second? Everybody else wants to stay. You're out of luck.
Yeah, I want to stay. I can second that.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? All right, we are adjourned.